Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Yashodanandana Praja Jana Ranjana. Yamuna Tiravanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Radha Madhava Ki Jai. Good morning, everyone. Happy Wednesday in the middle of the week. So happy to be here with all of you. And today we're reading from the 9th canto. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. You can.
Hi, Kishori. I think I only know your name, Batu Gopal Prabhu, and they're Shyamala Kishori's parents. So welcome to Krishna House. You want to say something, Prabhu? No.
Maybe later. Thank you, Shruti. So yeah, I'm really happy to have my parents here visiting me. I'm really grateful. Okay, we can go to the chapter summary. Okay. So this is a very interesting chapter, and we're not going to really get too much into the story, but we will read the summary so you know what this chapter is about. Actually, every chapter in the 9th canto is pretty fascinating, right? The pastimes. So let's do this. So let's have 2 readers, maybe maybe Tyler and Christina. 2 paragraphs. So you have to scroll up, right? Or is that the beginning? Okay, that's it. Yeah. So Christina, you can read that and then next paragraph, and then Tyler can read the one after that.
The summary of this 14th chapter is given as follows. This chapter describes Soma and how he kidnapped the wife of Brihaspati and begot in her womb a son named Buddha. Buddha begot Pururava, who begot 6 sons headed by Ayu in the womb of Urvashi. Lord Brahma was born from the lotus that sprouted from the navel of Garbhodakashayi Vishnu. Brahma had a son named Atri, and Atri's son was Soma, the king of all drugs and stars. Soma became the conqueror of the entire universe, and being inflated with pride, he kidnapped Tara, who was the wife of Brihaspati, the spiritual master of the demigods. A great fight ensued between the demigods and the Asuras, but Brahma rescued Brihaspati's wife from the clutches of Soma and returned her to her husband, thus stopping the fighting. In the womb of Tara, Soma begot a son named Buddha, who later begot in the womb of Ila a son named Aila, or Pururava. Urvashi was captivated by Pururava's beauty, and therefore she lived with him for some time. But when she left his company, he became almost like a madman. While traveling all over the world, he met Urvashi again at Kurukshetra, but she agreed to join with him for only 1 night in a year.
By the way, Urvashi is celestial lady from the heavenly planets, so that's who she is. Okay, and then Tyler, if you can read the next paragraph.
1 year later, Pururava saw Urvasi at Kurukshetra and was glad to be with her for one night. But when he thought of her leaving him again, he was overwhelmed by grief. Urvasi then advised Pururava to worship the Gandharvas. Being satisfied with Pururava, the Gandharvas gave him a woman known as
Agnistali.
Thank you. Pururava mistook Agnistali for Urvasi, but while he was wandering in the forest, his misunderstanding was cleared, and he immediately gave up her company. After returning home and meditating upon Urvasi all night, he wanted to perform a Vedic ritualistic ceremony to fire. Thereafter, he went to the same place where he had left Agnistali, and there he saw that from the womb of a Sami tree had come an Ishvata tree. Pururava made 2 sticks from this tree and thus produced a fire. By such fire, one can satisfy all lusty desires. The fire was considered the son of Pururava. In Satya Yuga, there was only one social division, called Hamsa. There were no divisions of Varna like Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Sudra. The Veda was the Veda was the Omkara. The various demigods were not worshipped, but the supreme personality of Godhead was the only worshipable deity.
Thank you both. Om Gyanatirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshu Umilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. So I just want to make a couple of points here. This is a brief summary of the story, but the interesting thing about this fire that he created, right? He had these 2 pieces of wood, and then he created a fire that could satisfy all lusty desires. It's interesting because fire is known for burning up things, right? Like that fiery hot element burning up, purifying. And I was thinking if we had a way to package this, like in Kali Yuga, here's 2 sticks, and it has like advertisement. You can get rid of all of your lusty desires. How popular do you think that would be here in this day and age? Probably not very. If it was in terms of like getting rid of all of your lusty desires, it depends how it was expressed. But yeah, I'm not clear on whether exactly how those sticks work, but it's very interesting. So we'll go to text 48. And before we do this, I want to just back up a little. I'll read a couple of things here. So he created that fire, Pururava, right? By such a fire, one can achieve all success in material enjoyment and be purified, and in seminal birth, initiation, and in the performance of sacrifice, which are invoked with the combined letters A, U, and M, which make Om. Thus, the fire was considered the son of King Pururava. By means of that fire, Pururava, who desired to go to the planet where Urvashi resided, performed a sacrifice. So by that very fire, he performed a sacrifice by which he satisfied the supreme personality of Godhead, Hari, the enjoyer of the results of sacrifice. Thus he worshipped the Lord, who is beyond the perception of the senses and is the reservoir of all the demigods. So interestingly, over and over, and especially in this 9th canto and then other cantos as well, we see again and again that running after material desire always ends up in disappointment. He really wanted to be with this lady, but she left at the end of the day because she was a celestial woman and her residence was there, but he's on the earth planet and he couldn't keep her attention that long. You know, she wanted to be back with where she belonged. So he was very disappointed. And again, we find over and over in the Bhagavatam that the only solution for that disappointment is to turn to Krishna. And even though Pururava's desire is not pure, he's still turning to Krishna. He's still turning to Vishnu in the form of this yajna. He's doing this sacrifice. And Krishna is so kind that he actually reciprocated with his material desires, really. And he ended up in the very last verse of this chapter, it says that Pururava had inaugurated a karma kanda sacrifice, and thus Pururava, who considered the yogic fire his son, was able to go to Gandharva Loka as he desired. So he didn't use yagya, like the sacrificial fire or penances or those activities to take him back to Godhead. But Krishna is so kind that he reciprocates with every living entity's desire. And so he, hopefully en route to Krishna, he got to stop at Gandharva Loka and finish up those material desires. So, okay, so now we're on the next verse, which is text 48. And I'll read the translation. In the Satya Yuga, the first millennium, all the Vedic mantras were included in one mantra, pranava. Do you know what pranava is? The root of all Vedic mantras. In other words, the Atharva Veda alone was the source of all Vedic knowledge. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Narayana, was the only worshipable deity. There was no recommendation for worship of the demigods. Fire was one only, and the only order of life in human society was known as Hamsa. It's not, that Sanskrit word is not in there. What does Hamsa mean? Swan, right? Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay, so let's read that. Let's do the Sanskrit. Eka eva pura vedha pranava sarvavan maya devo narayano nanya eko nirvarna eva cha. Do you recognize some words in here? Yeah, Eka means one. What else? Sarva means all. So Sarva Vanmaya means all the Vedic mantras. Veda. Yeah, Veda means, okay, so, and then Devo Narayano, what does that mean? Yeah, one deity, yeah. Kind of similar to that part in the Bhagavad Gita introduction, right? Or Prabhupada says, one supreme person, one supreme book, like that. No other. Oh, Nanyu, yes. No other than Narayan. Okay, and then fire. Someone said the fire word? Yeah, Eka Agni. One fire, right? So we see this Eka comes up. All right, so let's sing it together again. Eka eva pura veda pranava sarva vanmaya devo narayano nanya eko nirvarna eva cha. So let's do the translation together. In the Satya Yuga, the first millennium, all the Vedic mantras were included in one mantra, pranava, the root of all Vedic mantras. In other words, the Atharva Veda alone was the source of all Vedic knowledge. Supreme Personality of Godhead, Narayan, was the only worshipable deity. There was no recommendation for worship of the demigods. Fire was one only, and the only order of life in human society was known as Hamsa. So this is a description of Satya Yuga, which is completely different from our current Kali Yuga. So let's see the purport here. In Satya Yuga, there was only one Veda, not four. Later, before the beginning of Kali Yuga, this one Veda, the Atharva Veda, or some say the Yajur Veda, was divided into four: Sama, Yajur, Rig, and Atharva, for the facility of human society. In Satya Yuga, the only mantra was Omkara, Om Tat Sat. There was a devotee when I was growing up who used to always say, Om Tat Sat, thanks a lot. Somehow that sticks in my mind when I hear that. The same name, Omkar, is manifest in the mantra, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Unless one is a Brahmana, one cannot utter Omkara and get the desired result. But in Kali Yuga, almost everyone is a Shudra, unfit for pronouncing the pranava, Omkara. Therefore, the Shastras have recommended the chanting of the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. Omkar is a mantra or Mahamantra, and Hare Krishna is also a Mahamantra. The purpose of pronouncing Omkar is to address the Supreme Personality of Godhead Vasudeva. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. And the purpose of chanting the Hare Krishna mantra is the same. Hare, O energy of the Lord. Okay, everyone?
Krishna.
O Lord Krishna. Hare, O energy of the Lord. Rama, O Supreme Lord, O Supreme Enjoyer. The only worshipable Lord is Hari, who is the goal of the Vedas. Vedaischa sarvar aham eva vedya. By worshiping the demigods, one worships the different parts of the Lord, just as one might water the branches and twigs of a tree. But worshiping Orion, the all-inclusive Supreme Personality of Godhead, is like pouring water on the root of the tree, thus supplying water to the trunk, branches, twigs, leaves, and so on. In Satya Yuga, people knew how to fulfill the necessities of life simply by worshiping Narayan, Supreme Personality of Godhead. The same purpose can be served in this age of Kali by the chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra, as recommended in the Bhagavatam. Kirtanad eva Krishnasya mukta sangha padam rajat. Simply by chanting the Hare Krishna mantra, one becomes free from the bondage of material existence and thus becomes eligible to return home back to Godhead. I forgot to offer if you want to sing the verse. Somehow I skipped that, but would anyone like to sing the verse?
Eka eva pura vedaha. Varnai vacha.
You want more devotee? Eka eva pura veda. Pranava sarvavanmaya. Nivanayana Eko virvarna eva cha. Okay, thank you. So now you know another way to say the Om is, what's another word for Om? Pranava, yeah. So next time you're at a yoga studio, you can say, now we're going to do our Pranava session. You know, they like to do Om sometimes in yoga circles. And it's very, if you've ever done it in a huge group, it's a very powerful sound, very, it really transforms, you know, especially when it's chanted by devotees of Krishna, of course. People chant it for various reasons, but it's the original sound, right? This A, this Ah, U, and together it makes this Om, right? So I wanted to talk here about a few things. One is that oftentimes in the other, throughout our lives, there's like a lot of different things we come across of techniques to help us, especially when it either help us materially or spiritually, either one. But in the spiritual context, we hear a lot of different things. Do this, do that, do that. And also in the material world, self-help books, for example, this book, and then it contracts that book. And there's a lot of different advice given to us all the time. And it can be kind of overwhelming. And so this purport, which Prabhupada often does really nicely, is he hones in on the essential important thing. And that is the one mantra, the same mantra that was present then as Om is the Hare Krishna mantra today. And he's simplifying it. He's saying by chanting this one mantra of Krishna, it's like watering a tree or the roots of a plant. So who here has taken care of plants? Raise your hand if you've ever taken care of a plant. Okay, who here has never taken care of a plant? Okay, so a couple, maybe, yeah. Okay, some people just are in between, they don't really know. So most of us have watered, at least once in our life, have watered a plant as a child or something, right? And usually, especially if you think about those plants that have many, many leaves, like if you think of the Tulsi plant, for example, she has so many, many tiny leaves, right? Imagine if instead of watering the roots, you were told that to maintain a plant, you had to water every single leaf, and that's how you maintained its life. Can you imagine how much time that would take, like watering each leaf, making sure that each leaf is nourished? And probably take hours, especially if you have a plant with many leaves. And yeah, sometimes, you know, like with plant caretakers, they'll like wipe their leaves once in a while to take the dust off. And that's a kind of a time-consuming process, like dusting the leaves. So the analogy of watering the root is really brilliant because it shows that by doing that one activity, which is simple, you take your watering can, you go right down to the base, even little children can do it, right? And you water the root, and then that water goes down to those roots, and automatically that the plant itself takes care of bringing that water up to the leaves and taking care of making each leaf green and fresh and vibrant. So we don't have to do that ourselves. I was thinking of another analogy where, and maybe you can guess it, there's another analogy that's often given for when you take care of one thing, everything else is satisfied. What is that analogy? The stomach, yeah. So feeding the stomach takes care of the rest of the part of the body. So imagine, I was just kind of thinking, imagine if it wasn't simple like that. Imagine if we had to literally feed every cell like in our body. There's probably trillions. I don't know if anyone knows the amount of cells, but there's so many in our body, and it would be impossible to, you know, physically or literally care for each one of those with nutrients. So by this amazing process of feeding the stomach, everything else is automatically taken care of. The stomach, the digestive organs, make sure that the nutrients go through the bloodstream, and then everything is smooth and fast and efficient that way. So those two analogies are really helpful to remind us of how special this Hare Krishna chanting is. By doing this one thing, we're taking care of everything else. It's actually the water of the that we're watering the plant, or it's the food that we're putting into the stomach. It's the essence of life, really, the essence of our spiritual life. And so when we take that one thing, everything else automatically will happen smoothly. The panacea, yeah, it's a nice word, right? Panacea. Thank you. Yeah. Oftentimes in complicated world, like we'll hear people will sell their books, like they'll say, the 5 key, I don't know, like techniques to finally break free of poverty and become the richest person on the planet, or whatever, you know, these catchy titles, or the solution, like the I think there was the book, The Secret, yeah, The Secret, right? The one solution to something. So there, and it's a selling factor because everyone's looking for that one easy kind of remedy to solve everything else. They're looking for that one watering can or that food that, okay, now I can just do this one thing. We're looking for simplicity, really. I don't know about all of you, but I like when I declutter things and just kind of get to the essence of something. So like, let's say you have a desktop computer. I'm sure you can all relate to this, and it starts piling up with all these little icons and files and folders. And then once in a while you kind of go through and put them all in your recycle bin or sort them. And then you have this empty screen and it just feels simple. Then maybe you have your one document that you're working on, your paper for school, and your mind's peaceful. Okay, that's my one thing. So I think we all like that simplicity. Oftentimes in Kali Yuga, the mind is jumping here and there, even more so with phones and like, oh, you know, like Instagram or that one, and there's a little red dot here and I got to check. So we're constantly jumping everywhere and losing that one pointed focus. So it's a real blessing to be able to be reminded that Krishna consciousness is actually very simple, and we only need to really focus on first and foremost one thing, which is our relationship with the holy name. And then everything else will come secondary. We'll feel peaceful. We'll feel simple in our consciousness so that everything else, a cupboard, you take everything out and you put your main big box first, and then everything else can go around it, you know, like your, but we first do the holy name. So I was thinking a lot about Mahatma Prabhu. He recently gave a seminar on self-care. He's done it a couple times now. the self-care in Krishna consciousness, in the context of Krishna consciousness. And he was describing the relationship between self-care and chanting the holy names. He said that in Kali Yuga, the best way for self-care is to chant Krishna's names. That is the ultimate self-care for the soul. And if you think about it, like as souls, we're moving through our lives, but we're actually dormant in a way. Our soul is not really impacted. It's kind of there, but it's covered over and it's just going along for the ride. And our body and mind and senses are all, engaging with things. But the soul's kind of dormant. But then as soon as the holy name comes into it, the soul perks up. Imagine if someone's like in a coma, and then there's, they hear some music from their past and all of a sudden they wake up, right? So it's kind of like that. The soul's dormant, and then all of a sudden the holy name enters the picture, and the soul is the one that kind of shakes awake. The soul recognizes that relationship with Krishna. So the ultimate self-care for the soul is that chanting of the holy name. So he was describing that the holy name is Krishna's way of loving us. It was a really nice meditation to think about. And that all we need to do is to receive Krishna's love through his holy name. We have to be the recipient of it by showing up. He said, so be open to receive, accept, and deeply feel Krishna's love through the chanting, and then try to reciprocate with that love as you chant. And then he also said that the holy name is Krishna's loving call to us. And this struck me. He said, please, Krishna saying, please chant and return to me. Please chant and return to me. It's like such a sweet meditation to think about the holy name. Krishna's giving his love in that way. And he's just waiting for us. So I'm not sure if all of you have heard this, but in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, it's the description of Krishna's flute is given. And Krishna's flute and the holy name have a connection. So you'll hear this. It says in the Madhya Lila, the vibration of Krishna's flute is always prominent in the ears of the gopis. Naturally, they cannot hear anything else. Constant remembrance of the holy sound of Krishna's flute keeps them enlightened and enlivened, and they do not allow any other sound to enter their ears. So they're one-pointed, right? They're like, there's that description of the cows when they're hearing Krishna's flute, their ears are like vessels. You know how those cows in India, they have these beautiful big ears, and they're kind of holding out their ears, just drinking in that sound of Krishna's flute. So similarly, the gopis are just, they don't want any other sound to enter their ears except Krishna's flute. Since their attention is fixed on Krishna's flute, they can't divert their minds to any other subject. The vibration of Krishna's flute is represented by the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. So the vibration of Krishna's flute is represented by the Hare Krishna mantra. Can you imagine how amazing that we get a glimpse of Krishna's flute playing through the chanting of the holy names? A serious devotee of the Lord who chants and hears this transcendental vibration becomes so accustomed to it that they can't divert their attention to any subject matter not related to Krishna's blissful characteristics and paraphernalia. So the vibration of Krishna's flute is represented by the Hare Krishna mantra. So this is in the purport of CC. Oh, no, it's a verse, yeah. Madhya Lila 21, 144. So verse 144 of Madhya Lila. So what do you think? Have you ever experienced a time where you've felt that kind of absorption and where everything else is kind of dissipated and you feel like, oh, my ears are just wanting to hear that sound and I'm just completely in that moment? Have you had a moment like that? Even if it's just a moment, right? Maybe it was one mantra. I'm sure we've all had that, right? Raise your hand if you've had that for one mantra. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, and then our goal is to just do that for more than to keep trying to add one more mantra. Let me now let me now open my ears to the next one and be there, like this eager recipients of Krishna's flute playing. All the cows, they're standing there frozen, waiting to hear, and they're like, you know how when you hear something way distant, you're like, oh, an ice cream truck when you're growing up, when you're a kid, you're like, oh, I think I hear the music coming, and you get all excited, right? The music. At least here in America, we had ice cream trucks when I was growing up. Do they have it in Europe too? What about India? They had some sound, some kind of music or something? The bells. Yeah, so something that triggers the ears, right? Like, oh, okay, and then you get all excited. So in Krishna's pastimes, the animals and everybody's ready, waiting, like, oh, I hear a faint, distant sound of Krishna's flute coming, right? And they're so eager and ready. So similarly, the devotees of Krishna are like, oh, or any soul that's ready to encounter Krishna is like that. Oh my God, I hear something. I hear the ching, ching, ching in the distance. Like, you ever had that where you're just going about your day in some city, maybe you're traveling, and all of a sudden you hear a ching, 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 and you're like, oh, all right. Some devotees are somewhere, and then you kind of try to follow the sound. And there's been souls like that who are drawn to the chanting. They've never met Hare Krishnas or the movement before, but they're drawn to the sound as if those cows that are like drinking it in, and they're just spellbound. I remember sometimes when we used to do Harinam, like with my family, we used to go on Harinam every Saturday morning when I was growing up. And sometimes you would see children walking by, and they would stop and just, and until today, I mean, you still see that, right? We don't see too many kids around here, but little families of kids, and the children stop and their mouth would kind of drop open, and they would stare, and then like the mother or father's like trying to pull them. They're just spellbound, kind of like captivated by the sound of the holy name. So that's what we want to become like. So that's our goal, is to see if we can develop that desire to hear. That's all we need to do, is like, let me hear when the holy name is in my periphery, when I have this opportunity, these 2 hours or whatever it is that I have during my day to chant. Let me try to remember that image of those devotees trying to hear Krishna's flute coming, and what is that going to be like, and how is that going to transform my heart? Because the flute playing would enter their ears, and then it would create ecstatic emotion, because they were hearing, for them, that was a directly feeling connection to Krishna. So similarly, when we're hearing the holy name come through our ears, it will transform our heart, and we start feeling that emotion come up and that connection to Krishna. We'll start feeling Krishna's love for us, and we will be able to reciprocate with that. So what happens if we don't have the taste for chanting? So, or like a interest. And this happens throughout life. Life is not, Krishna consciousness is not, it's not like we start here, we go here, and it's one straight graph, right? It's not like that in spiritual life. Usually for most of us, it's very much more like this, with peaks and valleys. Sachinanda Maharaj gave a good analogy once of a spiral. I thought that was very interesting. So he said, sometimes in spiritual life, you'll feel like you're in the same place again. Like, oh man, I was struggling with this 5 years ago. The same thing is coming back to me. How is this possible? I'm regressing or something. But he said, if you think of spiritual life as a spiral, then an upward spiral, specifically an upward spiral. So if you have one of those slinkies, right? Imagine if you're like stretching it up, and that's the spiral of the devotees traveling up. So you might be at the same place. Like at one point, the slinky, you're going to be going around like, oh, it feels similar because you're kind of there. But if you actually are self-reflective, you'll realize you're one step higher. You're at the same issue is there, but you have some new way of realizing it, or some new understanding. So you're actually moving up, even though you feel like, ooh, I'm recognizing the same patterns. So I really liked that analogy of that, like kind of the slinky. So it's encouraging. Sometimes we can feel like repetitive, but we're actually slowly moving up, even though it might maybe not look like it, very slowly. So if I'm not feeling interest, there's one interesting thing that Mahatma Prabhu said, was that when we don't have a taste for chanting, it was kind of an eye-opening. There's different explanations for why we don't have taste, right? Or why we don't have interest. But he said, in the context of self-love, he said, no interest in chanting means that I don't love myself. I don't love myself as a spirit soul. Because if I actually cared about myself as a spirit soul, then I would want to chant, right? And he said that and then this idea of self-envy. Have you ever heard of that term, self-envy? It's kind of interesting. But there's a Sanskrit phrase, atma druk, and it means self-envy. We're actually doing something that's harming ourself, our real interest going. So when I intentionally choose not to chant, then I'm like harming myself. And so in some way, it's kind of like self-envy. Interesting, right? There's a verse in Bhagavatam actually that says that it mentions that envious of one's own self in the 4th canto. It says, any person who engages himself within this material world in performing activities that necessitate great struggle, which is a chance to attain liberation from miseries. And who, after obtaining a human form of life, which allows us to attain liberation, undertakes the difficult tasks of fruitive activities, must be considered to be cheated and envious of his own self. So even, especially once we have the gifts, and then we just kind of put them on the shelf, like, oh, we are understanding it, but then we go, oh, I'm not going to do that. I'm like, Prabhupada used to sometimes chastise devotees when he would see like a bee bag was hanging somewhere for several days. Like, oh, whose bee bag is, I think he said whose bee bag is crying, right? At one time, sitting over there. So if I package up these things and I put them to the back burner and think, oh, I'll get to it later, but I'm going to really focus on getting myself happy in this material world, then we're actually causing ourselves self-harm. Ironically, we might not notice it, we might not think so, but it's a good reminder. And then let's see if I can ask a question here. So what are your thoughts on this point about not loving ourselves? Mahatma Prabhu said that Krishna loves us, and therefore we need to love ourselves, because if we don't, it's like we're kind of going against Krishna because Krishna loves each one of us fully and completely as spirit souls, right? So he was saying that self-love is actually inherent because we're part of Krishna. So for us to hate ourselves doesn't make any sense because Krishna loves us, right? So I'm curious what your thoughts are on that in terms of the holy name and our connection and loving ourselves, as, you know, chanting as a way of self-love. Like, what are your thoughts? Yes. Can you pass that microphone?
Right. When you first said it, I thought, well, how can you love somebody if you do not know them, right? We often give this example with God, and how can you love him if you do not know him? But if you don't realize that you are actually a soul, so we have to keep repeating it to us, going back to basics.
Yeah.
You're not this body. So unless you realize you're not this body, you can't love you as yourself, as a spirit soul. So I think that's the problem. It's kind of the root of the problem.
Yeah.
We haven't realized completely who we are.
That's a really good point. So and then we think, oh, it's self-love. We get caught up in the body and the mind. We're thinking that's us. But it's actually much deeper than that. It's about the soul. Yeah, spirit soul. Any other thoughts on that? Yeah, Nitai.
Just relating to the point, like Mahatma Prabhu said, like,
Yeah, Tom.
that if you don't chant, like, you don't love yourself. And there's like a verse from the Bhagavatam which also talks about like similar principle, if I can share that.
Mm-hmm.
It's in 10th canto, and the translation is, glorification of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is performed in the Parampara system. It is conveyed from spiritual master to disciple. Such glorification is relished by those no longer interested in false temporary glorification of this cosmic manifestation. Descriptions of the Lord are the right medicine for the conditioned soul undergoing repeated birth and death. Therefore, who will cease hearing such glorification of the Lord except a butcher or one who is killing his own self? Like at the same point, like one who is not like interested in chanting the holy name, similarly, like not interested in hearing about Krishna, they don't love themselves, because that's the best medicine for us.
Yeah.
If we're not loving ourselves, we're not interested in those things.
Mm-hmm. I like that phrase, killer of the soul, right? Is that what it said? Killer of the self.
Yeah, killing of the self.
Yeah, wow, what a graphic image. Kishori time. Any other thoughts on that point? Yes. Microphone over there.
We talked a little bit about this yesterday, but sometimes we set the bar a little bit too high when we're not patient with ourselves and we're very black and white. And that can create some self-care, self-love issues. If we don't do everything very, very well, perfectly, we don't fit into this movement, we don't fit into Krishna house, we don't fit into wherever. And that's where it becomes difficult to just be patient with yourself and actually have some self-love.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's not about perfection, right? It's about just taking one more step towards Krishna. So we have to be patient with ourselves. There's two things, and they're kind of juxtaposed, but there's two important qualities that we need for practicing Krishna consciousness. Who knows those two qualities? Yeah, patience and enthusiasm. And they're kind of like, oh, interesting. But they go together. You can be both. If you're just enthusiastic, what happens? If you're just like, oh, I'm joining the Krishna house, what happens then? Burnout, yeah. Sometimes someone might get sleep deprived and then end up sleeping all weekend, things like that. It's not sustainable, right? It's kind of just, usually if we're just enthusiastic without the patience part, then it's just burning out. And what happens if we're just patient, but we don't have enthusiasm? What does that look like? Yeah. I'll just wait to be rescued. Oh, well, one day I'll get there, right? And a patient, very
Sleeping every day.
sleeping every day, yeah. No show. Yeah. It's kind of waiting. Yeah. He'll knock on my door.
What is it? So why don't you try going to the temple and let's see if the Lord stops you.
Ah, interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
I was thinking that the ways in which, is it working? The ways in which devotees may not, or the reasons that sometimes devotees may not love themselves, or is because because we have qualities that aren't endearing, or that aren't pleasing to Krishna, and we don't like those things about ourselves. So it's not so clear cut, because if we see ourselves as a soul, and Krishna loves us as souls, but there's so much in our experience of ourselves that is not just the pure soul. There's a lot of other gunk mixed in there, right? And those things are not very pleasing to Krishna or ourselves, so then we can come to dislike ourselves for those and get down on ourselves. So then I guess you kind of address that, saying we just need to be patient and they'll get gradually purified. But how can we love ourselves despite all the gunk?
Yeah, the gunk is a good word. Like being in a swamp here, right? We're just yeah, actually we are in the swamp part of Florida. Crocodile, alligators. I guess that what comes to mind is that idea from the Bible that you can hate the sin, but not the sinner. So if we keep, the main solution to our self-loathing is to keep Krishna in the forefront and remember I'm part of Krishna, but Krishna, right? And so all I need to do is, I'm aware of all the stuff covering my soul. Let me just put myself near the fire. Let me just go near the shower, or whatever the analogy is. Let me go near that energy of Krishna that's going to clean that gunk off and reveal my real self. So let me not get so hung up on that stuff that I just get depressed and don't even come to the temple anymore because I'm so hung up that I really want. It's not good for my spiritual life and I want to get rid of it. But instead of getting caught up in how much I hate it, let me turn to what I love and what will be the solution. Let me go towards Krishna, and then he'll automatically get rid of all that yucky stuff. One thought that comes to mind when it in relation to not having an interest in chanting, you might all have your techniques, like when you go through times in your life where it's difficult, you don't really want to chant, right? You have different things that help us. But one thing that really I find really helpful is to be in the presence of someone who has a taste for chanting. And even if it's not even talking, but you're just literally sitting near someone who's enthusiastic, who's focused, who's drinking it in with those ears, drinking in the sound. That is so powerful that it can transform our own resistance. We can kind of, that's the power of association. We kind of soak in the other people's, it's like, how do you say it? Wash off, I guess, kind of their experience. What is it? Rubs off on us. Yeah. So they're experiencing something and it's kind of overflowing, and then we can kind of go, let me be near them so I catch some of those, drops of, there was a story where Prabhupada was, Indradumna Maharaj was saying that in Paris, Prabhupada was crying once when he saw the Devis. He was just feeling some ecstasy, I think, and some tears came out, and the devotees were trying to catch the tears, like because it's that idea of you want to be near the devotee, you want as much as possible to catch something that they're feeling. Let me be near them, and let me be as pleasant to be around so they don't push me away. Let me try to be in the company of devotees. In that way, it'll rub off on me. And I thought of this amazing story of the prostitute and Haridas Thakur. How there's a story where she was sent, Haridas Thakur was this great devotee who was known for his love of chanting. He would chant 300,000 names of Krishna, of the holy name mantra, every single day, which I think someone did the calculation on. I forget the 192 rounds a day. So that, imagine that takes a lot of hours, most of the day. It takes most of the day. So there was an envious person named Ramachandra Khan, and he wanted to hurt Haridas, and he wanted to make him fall down so that everyone would reject him. And so he sent a prostitute to tempt him, and Haridas was chanting. And this is one of the most touching stories, I think, where this lady comes over 3 days, and every time she's sitting there and he says, just wait, I will accept you, but I need to first finish this amount of rounds. I need to first finish my mantras for the day. And then she goes, okay, I'll wait. And then she waits, and then she goes, and then she comes again. Oh, I still have some more. I didn't finish my quota for the month. And he basically was tricking her into staying there and waiting. Just wait. And he said, I'll accept you, which is interesting because he actually did, but in another way, in a spiritual way, he accepted her. So then just by sitting there, I like that scene from that old movie, that Hare Krishna movie of Haridas Thakur. And the lady's sitting there, and eventually she's kind of nodding off, right? Like we do when we're tired, and she's nodding off. And then she starts to chant, like Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. She starts to follow along with him. She's waiting and she's kind of bored and she's chanting. And all of a sudden, the transformation starts happening in her heart just by sitting there with him. It's so touching. Like, think about that. She became so transformed that he said, just the last day when he was finishing up his mantras, she threw herself at his feet. And she said, I'm so sorry. I was coming here with the intentions was so wrong. And I'm so sorry. And please accept me as your disciple. Please allow me to serve you. And so he gave her instructions. And he told her, go back to where you live, distribute everything you own, then come back here where there's a nice Tulsi plant. There's a little cottage. Come here. Oh yeah, you can put the picture up. So there's a beautiful painting of that. So you can come back here and chant. There she is in the front there. See, Haridas is leaving on the top. He's saying Haribol is leaving. And she shaved her hair, which was probably a big part of her feature. Like, she was probably had some attachment to her hair. So she shaved that all off, wore a single robe, and just chanted there in front of Tulsi Devi. Her life was completely transformed. Day and night, right? It's so touching. And all just because she sat in the company of Haridas Thakur and soaked in his chanting. Well, that's actually a different pastime. That's Maya Devi when Maya Devi came to, but they're similar, right? We get the mood here. Yeah, that's a good, yeah, good before and after. Yes, Christina. Okay.
Last night I was watching a Sachinanda Swami video, and he talked about that the benefit that you get when being in the company of devotees is that you start resonating with them. So yeah, so I just wanted to say that, like, I mean, you can use different metaphors. You know, it's like, oh, the chanting, the enthusiasm for chanting is rubbing off on me, or it's kind of overflowing. But the way he talks about it is resonance. So you have sort of this very strong, like a very strong sound, or a very strong vibration, and you kind of put yourself near it, and then you also start to resonate with that. That also starts to sort of become your vibration.
Nice. Yeah, like the waves start to line up. You know, like you think about a wave. Well, thank you. That's really nice. Okay, so we'll have breakfast now, and today I'll just quickly summarize the points we talked about. We talked about how the benefit of this simple process, right? This chanting is pouring the water on the roots. It's like feeding the stomach, everything else automatically taken care of. So if we can make that our main thing that we focus on, that relationship with Krishna. And then we talked about how it's a manifestation of Krishna's flute playing, and our ears can drink in that sound. Like, oh, if I can remember that image of the cows and the gopis waiting to hear the sound of Krishna's flute. And then we talked about what to do when we don't have interest or taste. And one of the ways we can do that is to sit in the presence of a great devotee. And we can remember that lady, she's so humble. We don't even know her name. I was thinking about that. Her name is not even in the book. She just became known as the prostitute, but imagine how humble, like, she just became, yeah, it's just very touching to think about how she transformed. So we can also, in a polite way, not like don't burst anyone's personal space, but we can be near someone, try to take in the association of devotees and drink in their association. So, okay, thank you all. Hare Krishna. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.